Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter. I am your host, Alex Newman. Thanks so much for being with us on this important day. We're doing this show right after the World Health Organization has declared a public health emergency of international concern. The monkeypox is coming to get you, so says the WHO. Joining us to discuss is the great Dr. David Martin. He's the founding CEO of MCAM. It's the international leader in intellectual property-based financial risk management. He is an absolute genius, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And, of course, he's been sounding the alarm. We've had him on the program before. He's been sounding the alarm about what these evildoers are doing through the weaponization of our healthcare system, through the weaponization of disease for many, many years. David, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with the Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus declaration, the WHO declaration that monkeypox is now a pandemic and a public health emergency of international concern. What does that mean, and how concerned should we be?
Well, Alex, first of all, great to see you again. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
And, you know, it was interesting. I wondered if people saw the marionette strings that were attached to his arms and legs, and more importantly, the ventriloquist hand that was up his backside when he actually made that announcement. It's actually funny to watch when people are willfully misleading and lying, and he was doing exactly that. There is no public health emergency of international or even domestic regional concern. And by the way, the Congo isn't upset about monkeypox. So this idea that we're going to trump up this allegation that somehow there are a few hundred people that might be sick, and that's somehow going to turn into all of us are going to apparently mysteriously show up at a gay nightclub like we all did in the 22 outbreak of monkeypox the first time. Because I know, showing up at the gay nightclub in Germany is a high risk factor for most of the world's population. Listen, Alex, as I said when I did the show back in 2022, when I talked about what was going on, we have to go back and look at the Nuclear Threat Initiative report, which was a tabletop exercise not unlike Event 201, which in the spring of 2021, and then published in the spring of 2022, laid out that we were going to schedule a monkeypox release roughly this time. They were planning for late 2023, early 2024. So they're right on time. They actually started dripping out the monkeypox threat about on schedule. And when I say on schedule, let's take a step back and say this is no different from what they did in Event 201 in October of 2019, before the COVID thing started. They announced that they were going to do a pandemic, and lo and behold, they did it on schedule. This is exactly the same thing, Alex. In fact, I laid out exactly the timeline that was in the Nuclear Threat Initiative publication, funded by, very importantly, Open Philanthropy, which is the front for Facebook. It is the private funded foundation, which is run by Dustin Moskowitz. And the same guy who wrote the check for Event 201 wrote the check for the Nuclear Threat Initiative. And the reason why this is a cause for concern, Alex, is not because the theater of monkeypox. Let's set that aside for a moment. There is no monkeypox outbreak of any concern whatsoever. But what there is a pox-like side effect of people's response to their immune failures around receiving the injections of the spike protein. And when you have surface skin lesions, which are increasing in their frequency, when you have side effects that are associated with the autoimmune diseases that are upcoming, which look like pox-like skin disorders, Alex, it's important to build a cover story that says that when somebody has a thing that looks like a rash that advances to quite serious disease and sometimes actually fatal outcomes, what is being done is they're selling the side effect of the COVID injection as a new outbreak. So the numbers are going to match up. That's the interesting thing. And that's why I said that back in 2022. They forecast that we were going to have as many as 200 million deaths. They were looking at 187 million to 200 million deaths in their scenario. They said that there was going to be as much as half the world's population allegedly suffering these side effects. They called it from the infection. But the point is, yes, we should be concerned, but we shouldn't be concerned about monkeypox. We should be concerned about the fact that the institutional lie is being sold to cover up a genuine consequence of the mRNA injection. And they knew that was coming. There was no question that this was going to be coming, so much so that it was published. And if anybody wants to go back, just Go into any browser, type Nuclear Threat Initiative, type monkeypox, and lo and behold, you're going to find out that they told us what was coming, lo and behold, 3 years ago.
Yeah, and David, it was such fortuitous timing. I reached out to you to see if you could come on the program to talk about this, and you sent me the link of exactly what you just described. I want to play a little clip of that, not including your response, but I just want people to see you're not making this stuff up. The Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Munich Security Conference did, in fact, do this very thing, and you called it 2 years ago exactly what they were going to do with it. So let's roll that clip.
There are growing questions today around a new and deadly outbreak. Scientists determined that this monkeypox virus was engineered. With limited antiviral drugs and no known effective treatments, countries around the world are struggling to control another pandemic with already devastating effects.
Seeing far fewer cases in countries where governments took early and decisive action.
And some international experts are urging the WHO to adopt a phased approach to warnings.
Wow, that's amazing, David. It's amazing that you knew this was coming a couple years ago, and here we are. Before we get to, what do we do about all of this, what makes you concerned about the side effects of the COVID injection? I mean, we've all now heard about the myocarditis. We all know that the things didn't prevent transmission or infection. We know that they've been caught lying over and over and over again. But where did you find the link between these skin lesions, these problems, and the various injections that they deployed around the world?
Yeah, well, let's take both elements of that question, Alex. First, the concern about the injections are actually twofold. The spike protein is one element of the concern. And as most people know by now, as early as 2002, we knew that was going to cause things like cardiomyopathy, myocarditis, and other cardiovascular related disorders. The clotting factor, which is actually a little bit of a curveball, was indicated in some of the early studies, but the human experience of the clots, as you all now everyone knows, was actually something that was far more egregious than was anticipated in the literature. But the myocarditis, cardiovascular disease-oriented symptoms, those were all expected. The genitourinary and reproductive side effects were all expected. We knew that this spike protein was going to go into the ovaries, it was going to go into the testes, it was going to hit reproduction. We knew that. The more dangerous, and the one that is clearly the most alarming in terms of fatalities, is what we're now calling turbocancers. That was a new term that we coined during the pandemic. But that was not accidental. In 2018 and preceding 2018, by almost 8 years, every study that looked at the ingredient pseudouridine, which was the synthetic aminonucleic acid that was used inside of the stabilization of the mRNA, every study that ever had been done using pseudouridine resulted in 100% fatality, Alex. And that is the reason why, when this clinical trial was started, they said it was a, quote, straight to humans protocol. The reason is because in all of the animal studies that preceded the use of pseudouridine in any animal study, the fatality rate was 100% in animals. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that when you get exposed to pseudouridine, your body actually has a suppression of its cancer-fighting abilities. And listen, all of us, every single human being walking around listening to the show, has probably some atypical cells. So we all have something in our bodies that kind of looks and feels like cancer. Now, the great news is our body has a natural defense mechanism to block it. Tiny problem. Pseudouridine blocks those mechanisms. So the reason why we're seeing this rapid expansion of what are called turbo cancers or stage 4 cancer on detection is because we know we injected a lethal ingredient into humans, and that is the death count, Alex, that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg on, but there will be considerable more work around that. And right now, that is the biggest cause of concern. The lesions are a forerunner of an autoimmune tertiary response, which actually is often associated, ironically, with the existence and the prevalence of some of these cancers.
Wow. And David, how did you discover all of this? I mean, why isn't this being talked about?
Well, it's unfortunately not a discovery, Alex. As you know, I reported on this stuff before it happened, and it's because we have the observation abilities. You said in my introduction, we underwrite intangible asset risk around the world. That means we see every innovation, every patent, every contract for research in 168 countries in real time. So we saw this coming. That's why we were so adamant about briefing the world that this was coming, so that people knew that if you can anticipate this, you can also be prepared not to fall for fear, not to fall for the reflex that they're asking you to do, and not to suspend liberty because somebody has decided to institute a terror campaign.
Amen. When we get back on the other side of the break, there's so much I want to ask you. What do we do? How do we hold these people accountable? Who is involved? So, folks, stay with us. We're going to be right back in just a moment, right here on Conversations That Matter for the New American Magazine with the great Dr. David Martin. Stay tuned.
Freedom is the cure.
You're dead on. This is the largest experiment performed on human beings in the history of the world.
The more you know.
What they're doing is they're forcing vaccination on people, and I believe they are killing people with this vaccination.
The freer you are.
It's murder. They are basically murdering people in hospitals.
The all-cause mortality we know is now higher in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group.
Stay informed on the issues that affect freedom. Get a subscription to The New American today. thenewamerican.com.
Welcome back to Conversations That Matter. I'm Alex Newman, your host, senior editor at The New American Magazine. We are still with the great Dr. David Martin. Brilliant founding CEO of MCAM, international leader in intellectual property-based financial risk management. They do stuff that I think most of us can't even comprehend. They study actuarial risk. They provide state-of-the-art actuarial risk management systems. They look at the intellectual property of the world, and they provide solutions to some of the largest banks, insurance companies in the world. It's an incredible company, and David is an incredible individual. And he actually warned about a lot of the things we're seeing. 2 years ago, he warned that monkeypox would be a cover for the side effects from these injections. David, thank you for staying with us over the break. I want to start just by addressing the people who are listening to us, and I know there are many who took the injection, whose loved ones took the injections. Is there hope? And if so, what should they be doing? How should they be thinking about this?
You know, Alex, I am obviously in a situation where what I do is I try to watch what's happening on the horizon. I really appreciate the work that Peter McCullough has been doing with nattokinase and trying to figure out ways that he can potentially help ameliorate some of the risks associated with some of the side effects associated with the injections. And I think his work is actually doing an enormous amount to help a number of people. So I encourage people to look at what he's doing, specifically around the nattokinase that he's developed in his formulas that are offering some people some real great encouragement. Pierre Corey, one of the greats who, as you know, just recently had his board certifications pulled. But Pierre Corey has done a fabulous job of looking at repurposing, ironically, some of the more generic forms of what used to be chemotherapies and other adjuvant therapies. And he's having great success. And I know that there are people who are doing that. My encouragement to people is actually to work on really making sure that everything you can do with respect to diet, exercise, general well-being is taken care of. Because remember, environmental triggers have an enormous amount to do with the forerunners of cancers and so forth. So, getting the glyphosates out of your diet, getting the GMOs out of your diet. Remember, anything that has a genetically modified soy or anything else. These are all things that if we get those things out of our diet, we actually have a chance of not having the forerunners, which are the problems that a lot of people run into. So part one is self-care, exercise, diet, making sure that you're actually part of the health ecosystem that's going to lessen your risk for cancers. But then there's another piece of this puzzle, which is there are an enormous number of therapies that people are on, which in fact are not helpful with respect to drugs generally, taken both prescriptions and over the counter. One of the reasons why I've been a huge advocate for John Hewlett's Cardio Miracle, which is the nitric oxide enhancer and vitamin D enhancer, the reason why I've been advocating for that is that the vast majority of people just have an insufficiency in things like vitamin D and other things. So there are some baseline things that we can all do to make sure that we're doing a better job of maintaining our core health. But here's the kicker. I've said, and you know this, Alex, I've said this in many of my public presentations, the pandemic was always fear. And at the end of the day, what we have to do is realize that the value of the foresight that we had, for example, when I talked about monkeypox coming 2 years ago and I told people when it was going to come, the value of foresight is actually so that we don't live in fear. If we know that these things are planned and orchestrated, then the fear campaign doesn't work. And more importantly, we as a collective can start standing up and taking actions to begin the process of making sure injunctions are filed in a timely way, that we get city councils and county councils to be aware that this is coming so that we're not treated as though this is a shock or a surprise. Because the notion of the emergency is what creates the pretext for the erasure of liberty. And we must make sure that on this particular instance, the monkeypox fraud is called out long before the interventions, the lockdowns, and all the liberty erasures happen.
So right on that same note, in addition to the monkeypox, they're now selling us hysteria about bird flu. So we've got CEPI having this big meeting down in Rio de Janeiro, the Global Pandemic Preparedness Summit. We've got the International Bird Flu Summit coming up in Washington, D.C., where they'll be preparing, they say, for mass fatality management. What's going on with the bird flu? Is that a related thing? Is that a separate thing, all for the same purpose?
Well, remember that H5N2, Alex, which we were all told was allegedly, when it was allegedly discovered in somebody in Mexico a couple months ago, we were told H5N2 had never been seen in humans or in human tissue. Ironically, you could buy it off the shelf from the commercial arm of NIAID. It was actually for sale. You can actually order it from a catalog. So when it was never seen before, I found it very fascinating that never seen before was except for the online catalog purchasable version of it, which has been in patents for the last 6 years. Listen, every one of these things is actually looking for a fundamental, plausible way to drive fear and disruption into liberty and the democratic process. This is scheduled, and as we move into the fall, and the importance of this conversation, Alex, and you know how much I support your work and the work of your publications, what I want to see is I want to see the public informed so that we don't fall for the perceived emergency or the perceived urgency of allegedly something that is a pandemic of concern, when the concern is that a few individuals have decided to hijack the orderly democratic processes that we have in this country and around the world. They've decided to hijack the notion of civil liberty, and those are the steps that we're now actively taking with a number of courageous prosecutors, where we're actually beginning those processes of making sure that not only do we get injunctions out there, but we hold the people who are promulgating these acts of terror accountable for their crimes.
Yeah, and that was the next thing I wanted to ask you about, too. I know you've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, working with prosecutors, getting this information to law enforcement authorities. I know here in Florida we've got the suit against Pfizer. I know in Kansas the state AG has now filed charges against them. Texas is going after them. But I guess the first question is, who all needs to be held accountable? I mean, certainly not, the pharma rep that didn't know any better and was told to go out and sell these things, but who do we need to hold accountable? Who are the people involved? And what is the process of getting that to happen? And how can our viewers and our listeners help?
Yeah, well, so first of all, every viewer and every listener can share this with any elected official, any state legislature, any state prosecutor, any sheriff, anybody in the criminal enforcement side of the world. But let's unpack it. Who's the WHO, right? The WHO is the criminal conspiracy called the World Health Organization. That is an illegal cartel. That is an illegal cartel that started in the 1940s and was illegal in its formation and is absolutely an illegal cartel. Remember, it used to be the Opioid Permanent Board before it became the World Health Organization. This is a drug dealing organization. It is a global cartel, and it needs to be held accountable for its criminal activities. But Dr. Chris Elias and his whole crony set at the Gates Foundation is part of this group. Jeremy Farrar of the Wellcome Trust and the entirety of the Wellcome Trust, including the fact that the head of the Wellcome Trust board at the time of the first pandemic was also the head of Secret Service and intelligence for the British government. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Open Philanthropy, NIAID as an institution, the universities in Texas, the universities in North Carolina, the universities that are part of Cold Spring Harbor Labs. These are all criminal organizations that need to be held accountable. And as a result, we have racketeering, we have the engagement in ultra-hazardous activities, which is a very significant criminal operation. There's a number of things we're doing, and the great news is we are making progress, but like everything else, the process moves slowly because the facts and the evidence are critical.
Yeah, it's so important. David, what's the best way for people to follow your work, for people to get involved in this? Are you on any social media? How can people follow the great work and the important stuff you're exposing?
I am at Dr. D. Martin World on X. That's the place I spend a lot of time. A number of people share my content on Rumble, on Telegram, and we do still have the David Martin World site up on YouTube, so you can see an enormous amount of several hundred archival videos with a lot of this information up there. And obviously, Alex, every chance you and I get to share this with your viewers and with your readers, it's always a great moment because I know one day we will actually have the critical piece of data fall in the critical hands and we will have justice roll down.
I'm really looking forward to it. Just followed you over on X. Folks, follow Dr. David Martin on X. It's Dr. D. Martin World. Follow him there for more updates on this. Dr. David Martin, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sounding the alarm and speaking so clearly on these issues. Really appreciate it. It's a great service to humanity, and I hope we can speak again very soon.
All is an honor, and I look forward to it. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much. All righty, folks, that's all we have time for today, but I'm telling you, go follow Dr. David Martin. If you can get his speeches that he's given, some of them are available on YouTube, maybe not YouTube anymore, Rumble. Go follow this man. I mean, it's just incredible, the depth of the exposure that he is providing. So go follow his work. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Alex Newman, Senior Editor at The New American. Until next time, thanks for watching, and God bless you all.
Character, vigilance, integrity. Will you stand in the gap between freedom and tyranny? The John Birch Society has been standing in the gap since 1958. Join us for our leadership conference September 20th and 21st in beautiful Laguna Hills, California. We'll hear from the courageous, the defenders and the leaders who stand in the gap to defend our American liberty. Get your tickets at jbs.org today.